Today I'm going to tell you a story that will shock you. A 40-year-old American named John lost $20,000 in just a few hours in Rio de Janeiro. He thought he was going on a romantic date through Tinder, but in fact, he was walking straight into a deadly trap set by experienced criminals. Stay until the end of this video because I'll reveal all the gruesome details of how this scam worked, the signs he ignored, and what you need to know to avoid being the next victim. Before we begin, please like this video, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and leave a comment letting us know if you've ever experienced any strange situations on dating apps. Don't leave the video now because the ending to this story is absolutely shocking and could save your life or the life of someone you love. John had just turned 40 when his life fell apart. After 15 years of marriage, his wife had filed for divorce completely unexpectedly. He discovered she had been having an affair for 2 years with his best friend, someone he trusted completely. The divorce process was brutal, both emotionally and financially. John works as a technology consultant and, despite being successful professionally, felt completely lost in his personal life. It was then that a friend suggested he take a trip to forget his troubles. John had always been curious about Brazil, especially after watching several documentaries about Rio de Janeiro. The idea of visiting the paradisiacal beaches, experiencing the local culture, and perhaps meeting someone special excited him for the first time in months. He decided to spend 3 weeks in Brazil, starting in Rio de Janeiro. When John arrived at Rio's International Airport on a Wednesday in March, the tropical heat hit him like a wave. He had booked a hotel in Copacabana, an area he considered safe and touristy. The first day was spent getting acclimated, exploring the beach, sampling the local food, and trying to overcome jet lag. But at night, alone in his hotel room, loneliness hit hard. That's when he remembered something a coworker had mentioned. Dating apps can be a great way to meet locals while traveling. John had never used anything like that during his marriage, but now he was single and in a new country. With some hesitation, he downloaded Tinder on his phone. Creating the profile was more difficult than he imagined. John wasn't very photogenic and didn't have many recent photos of himself. He chose a few images from previous trips, a professional photo, and wrote a simple bio. American visiting Rio, looking to meet interesting people and experience the local culture. He mentioned that he worked in technology and was in Brazil for a few weeks. In the first 2 days, John received a few matches, but the conversations didn't flow. Some women seemed interested only in practicing their English. Others were clearly looking for something he wasn't prepared to offer. He began to think that maybe dating apps weren't for him, that it might be too late to enter this digital dating world. It was on Friday that everything changed. John was having breakfast at his hotel when he received a match notification. When he opened the app, he was genuinely impressed. The woman's name was Isabella. She was 28 years old, and her photos showed a stunning brunette with piercing green eyes and a smile that seemed to light up the phone screen. Isabella's profile stated she was a model and photographer, born in Rio but with international experience. Her photos featured sophisticated settings, her at art openings, in elegant restaurants, on paradisiacal beaches. One photo in particular caught John's eye. Isabella posing next to a famous sculpture with a caption in perfect English about contemporary Brazilian art. Her first message arrived just minutes after the match. "Hi, John. I saw you're American and visiting our wonderful city. How's your experience in Rio so far?" The message was written in Portuguese, but when John replied in English, she immediately switched to fluent, elegant English. The conversation flowed naturally and engagingly. Isabella demonstrated her knowledge of technology, asked insightful questions about John's work, and shared fascinating stories about her modeling career. She explained that she had worked on campaigns for international brands, spoke 4 languages, and had been focusing more on photography in recent years. What impressed John most was Isabella's attention to detail. When he mentioned he was staying in Copacabana, she immediately recommended specific restaurants in the area, told him the best times to go to the beach, and even suggested cultural activities that a tourist wouldn't normally discover on their own. She seemed genuinely interested in making his experience in Rio unforgettable. Over the weekend, they exchanged messages constantly. Isabella sent photos of her daily life: a sophisticated breakfast on a terrace overlooking Christ the Redeemer, a photo shoot in stunning locations, relaxing moments at exclusive spas. Each image reinforced the impression that she led a glamorous and successful life. The conversations became deeper and more personal. Isabella showed genuine empathy when John shared about his recent divorce. She shared that she had also been through a difficult relationship and completely understood what it felt like to rebuild one's life. Sometimes the most painful experiences lead us exactly where we need to be, she wrote in a message that deeply touched John's heart. Isabella had a special way of making him feel unique and special. She praised his intelligence, his courage to travel alone to a different country, and his dedication to his work. She said she rarely met men with the combination of professional success and emotional sensitivity he demonstrated. John, whose self-esteem was shaken after his divorce, felt reborn with each message. On Monday, Isabella suggested they meet in person. "I know you're only here for a short time, and I don't want to miss the opportunity to get to know you better," she wrote. "I know incredible places that even the tour guides don't. How about we have dinner together tomorrow? I can show you the real Rio, not just the touristy side." John was excited and nervous at the same time. It had been years since he'd been on a first date, and this would be his first experience with someone he'd met through an app. Isabella suggested a restaurant downtown, in an area she described as authentic and full of local charm. She said she could pick him up at his hotel, but John preferred to meet her directly at the restaurant. They agreed to meet on Tuesday at 7 p.m., at the entrance to a downtown subway station. Isabella sent him her exact location and said she'd be wearing a light green dress so he'd easily recognize her. "I can't wait to meet you in person," she wrote, along with a heart emoji. On Tuesday, John spent the entire day anxious. He carefully chose his outfit, took a relaxing bath, and even bought flowers at a florist near the hotel. During the taxi ride downtown, he mentally replayed the conversations they had had, imagining what it would be like to be face-to-face with this fascinating woman. What John didn't know was that Isabella didn't exist. The photos were of a Brazilian model who had authorized the use of her image for a professional portfolio, but who had no connection to the Tinder profile. Behind those affectionate and clever messages was actually Rafael, a 35-year-old man who specializes in scamming tourists. Rafael didn't work alone. He was part of an organized gang that had developed a sophisticated method for pulling off what they called a love scam on foreign visitors. They carefully studied each victim's profile, creating fake personalities that matched exactly what each tourist was looking for. The group had access to hundreds of photos of Brazilian women, obtained through social media and modeling websites. They created convincing profiles, always with detailed and consistent stories. Rafael, specifically, was responsible for the conversations in English. He had studied the language at university and was well-versed in American culture, which made him particularly effective at scamming tourists from the United States. The operation always worked the same way. First, they identified the victim through their app profile. Single men, apparently financially successful, on leisure trips to Brazil. Then, they created a female profile that would be irresistible to that specific person. In John's case, they chose a model and photographer because he had mentioned an interest in art and culture. After establishing trust through days of conversation, they would arrange to meet in an area they controlled, always in the city center, where they knew the streets well and had planned escape routes. The meeting place was always described as authentic and special, far from the traditional tourist areas. When he arrived at the meeting point, John looked around for a woman in a light green dress. The subway station was busy, typical of a Tuesday night in downtown Rio. He checked his phone. 7:05 p.m. Isabella hadn't arrived yet, but that was normal, he thought. Perhaps Brazilian women had a different perception of punctuality. Then 2 men approached him. One was tall and thin, about 30, wearing a blue dress shirt. The other was shorter and stockier, appearing to be about 35, with a clean-shaven beard and casual but elegant clothing. Both had friendly smiles and appeared relaxed. "Are you John?" the taller man asked, speaking in a Brazilian accented but fluent English. "Isabella asked us to pick you up. I'm Miguel, and this is Daniel. We're her friends." John was a little surprised, but he didn't immediately suspect anything. Isabella had mentioned she had many friends in town, and it made sense that she would send someone to pick him up if something unexpected happened. "Oh, hello," John replied, extending his hand to shake. "Where's Isabella? Is she okay?" Daniel, the shorter one, replied with a reassuring smile. "She's at the restaurant waiting for us. There was a little problem with her car, so she asked us to come and pick it up. The place is a little difficult to find on your own, especially for those who don't know the city center well." Miguel added, "Isabella has talked a lot about you. She's really excited about this meeting. Come on, the restaurant isn't far from here, we can walk." John felt relieved. The explanation seemed logical, and the two men seemed genuinely friendly. He put the flowers he had bought in a bag and began walking with them. Downtown Rio at night had a unique energy, with the lights of historic buildings creating an almost magical ambiance. As they walked, Miguel and Daniel engaged in relaxed conversation. They asked about his trip, praised his choice to visit Brazil, and shared some funny stories about Isabella. Daniel said she was one of the most special people he knew, and that John was a lucky guy to have sparked her interest. But as they walked, John began to notice that they were moving away from the busiest area of the city center. The streets were getting darker, and there were fewer people around. When he asked about it, Miguel explained that the restaurant was in a more alternative part of the city, frequented by local artists and intellectuals. "Isabella has very refined tastes," Daniel said. "She doesn't like the obvious tourist spots. She prefers authentic places where she can have interesting conversations. You'll love the atmosphere." They turned onto a side street that was practically deserted. John felt butterflies in his stomach, but he tried to calm himself. Maybe it was just the natural nervousness of being in a foreign city at night. The two men were still chatting normally, so everything was probably fine. That's when they stopped in front of a dark alley between two old buildings. Miguel turned to John with a completely changed expression. The friendly smile was gone, replaced by a cold, calculating look. "John," Miguel said in a completely different tone, "we need to have a serious talk with you." Daniel positioned himself behind John, blocking any possible escape route. John's heart began to pound as he realized the situation had changed drastically in a matter of seconds. The alley was completely silent, except for the distant sound of traffic from the main avenue. "Look, my American friend," Miguel said, taking a step closer. "You came to Brazil looking for adventure, didn't you? Well, your adventure is going to be a little different than you expected." John tried to remain calm and asked with a trembling voice, "Where is Isabella? What do you want with me?" Daniel laughed in a way that made John's blood run cold. "Isabella? Dude, Isabella doesn't exist. I'm Isabella. I'm the one who's been talking to you all these days. I have to admit, you're a romantic guy. All those sweet messages you sent, they were really touching." The revelation hit John like a punch in the gut. All that connection he'd felt, all those deep conversations about life, about starting over, about finding someone special. It had all been an elaborate lie. He felt not only in physical danger, but utterly humiliated and betrayed. Miguel continued, "Now I'll explain how things will work. You'll cooperate with us. And if you do exactly what we ask, nothing bad will happen. You go back to your hotel tonight, continue your vacation, and this will just be an interesting story to tell when you get back to the States. But if you try to be a hero, scream, run, or don't cooperate," Daniel said, showing something under his shirt, "things will get very complicated for you. And remember, you're in our country, in our city. You don't know anyone here. You don't even know where you are right now." John looked around desperately. They were right. He was completely lost, in a dark alley, unsure of how to even get back to the tourist area. His cell phone was in his hand, but Miguel quickly snatched it away. "First rule, no cell phones for now," Miguel said, putting the phone in his pocket. "Now tell me, "Did you bring cash?" John replied in a choked voice. "I have about $300 in my wallet." "This is just the beginning, friend," Daniel said. "You're going to accompany us to some ATMs. You're going to withdraw the maximum amount allowed on your debit card. Then we'll do some shopping with your credit card. Nothing major, just a few things we can easily turn into cash." "Please," John begged. "I'll give you everything I have in my wallet, but don't do this to me. I'm in another country, and I need this money for the rest of the trip." Miguel shook his head with an almost fatherly expression. John, you don't understand the situation. You're not in a position to negotiate with us. You're in a position to collaborate. And look on the bright side. You're going to help two hard-working Brazilian guys earn some extra income." They began walking, Daniel in front and Miguel right behind John. With each step, John felt himself sinking deeper into a nightmare. They emerged from the alley and entered a street that was a bit busier, but still far from the tourist areas he knew. "Act naturally," Miguel whispered in her ear. "We're just three friends strolling through town. Any weird thing you do, any attempt to attract attention, and things will get very bad very quickly." The first ATM was 3 blocks away. As we walked, Daniel continued chatting as if nothing were happening, commenting on the architecture of the buildings and the city's nightlife. It was surreal. Here he was being kidnapped, yet his captors maintained a facade of normalcy that made it all the more frightening. When they got to the ATM, Miguel handed John's debit card back. "You're going to withdraw 1,000 reais, he instructed. "That's your card's daily limit, right? Don't try to withdraw a different amount. Don't try to enter any emergency codes. Just 1,000 reais. With trembling hands, John inserted the card and entered his PIN. The machine processed the transaction and dispensed the cash. Miguel immediately took the bills and put them away. "Very good, John. You're doing a great job. Now let's move on to the next step," Daniel said. "We know a really cool little shop nearby that accepts international credit cards. You'll buy some gifts to take home to your family in the United States." They walked another 5 minutes until they reached an electronics store that was still open, even though it was almost 8 p.m. John immediately realized this was no ordinary store. The place was dark. There were few items on display, and the clerk behind the counter clearly knew Miguel and Daniel. "Good evening," the clerk said in Portuguese, greeting the two scammers with obvious familiarity. Miguel responded in Portuguese, and John couldn't understand the conversation, but he realized they were talking about him. "John, my friend," Daniel said in English, "you're going to buy 2 top-of-the-line cell phones. They're excellent gifts to take back to the United States. The clerk has already set aside the most expensive models they have." The clerk showed off 2 high-end cell phones. The total price was 8,000 reais, about $1,600. John tried to protest. "That's a lot of money. I don't need 2 cell phones." Miguel approached him and spoke softly, but with an intensity that made John swallow any other objections. "You do need it. You really need it. Give me your credit card." With hands visibly shaking, John handed over his credit card. The transaction went through without a hitch. The clerk packed the phones into a bag, which Daniel immediately grabbed. "Excellent," said Miguel. "Now we need to go to a few more places. You're doing great, John. Keep it up, and everything will turn out well for you." If you find this story shocking, imagine what it must have been like for John to experience it firsthand. Leave a comment telling me if you've ever experienced insecurity or been scammed in Brazil, or if you know someone who has been a victim of some kind of fraud while traveling. Your experience can help others protect themselves. They spent the next hour going from store to store. At a jewelry store, John was forced to buy 3 gold chains that cost another $12,500. At a designer clothing store, he had to buy expensive suits that totaled another $1,800. With each purchase, John saw his travel budget rapidly disappearing. What tormented John most wasn't just the money he was losing, but the systematic and cold-blooded way the scammers operated. They knew exactly which stores to accept, had planned routes, and knew credit card limits. This was clearly not improvised. It was a professional operation. During one of the walks between stores, John tried one last negotiation. "Please, you've already taken over $5,000. That's more money than most people make in several months. Can you let me go now? Daniel stopped walking and looked John straight in the eye. Dude, you still don't understand. We know exactly how much you have available on your cards. Isabella, I picked up some information during our romantic conversations. You mentioned you just received a nice sum from the sale of some stocks after the divorce. We won't stop until we reach $20,000. John's stomach dropped. He had indeed mentioned the stocks during one of his conversations with the fake Isabella. He had said he was rebuilding his finances after his divorce and had managed to build up a considerable reserve. At the time, he thought he was sharing something intimate with someone special. Now he realized he had given away all the information the criminals needed. They arrived at a 24-hour currency exchange bureau. Miguel explained that John could make international bank transfers there. The currency exchange bureau clerk, like the one at the electronics store, was clearly part of the scheme. You'll transfer $8,000 from your U.S. account to an account we'll designate, Daniel explained. It's quick and simple. John made a last stand. I can't do that. This is a joint account. My bank will block suspicious transfers. No, you won't, Miguel said with disturbing confidence. You're going to call your bank. Tell them you're making an important purchase in Brazil and provide all the necessary security codes. And you're going to do it convincingly because your security depends on it. It was at that moment that John realized the true scale of the situation. This wasn't just an opportunistic heist. It was a complex operation that had been planned specifically for him, based on information he had voluntarily provided. He had been studied, mapped, and now he was being systematically robbed. The call to the bank was the most humiliating part of the entire experience. John had to pretend to be happy and relaxed while authorizing an $8,000 international transfer. The bank employee asked several security questions, all of which John answered correctly under the watchful eye of Miguel and Daniel. When the transfer was approved and confirmed, John felt as if a part of his soul had been ripped away. It wasn't just the money. It was the humiliation, the betrayal, the feeling of having been completely deceived and manipulated. But the night wasn't over yet. Daniel checked his watch. We still have time for one more stop before the banks close their international operations. They took John to 2 more ATMs at different banks, where he was forced to withdraw the maximum daily limit for each card he had. At one of the banks, the machine allowed a larger withdrawal due to John's account type. In total, they obtained an additional $200 in cash. The last stop was a used car dealership that was open late. There, Miguel explained that John would buy a used car for $4,500, which would then be immediately sold back to the dealership for $1,500. It was a way to turn credit card money into cash, leaving the dealership with $3,000 as a service fee. The dealership owner was clearly familiar with this operation. He quickly prepared all the necessary fake documentation, processed the purchase and sale in less than 30 minutes, and handed over $1,500 in cash to Miguel. By the time they left the dealership, it was after 11 p.m. John had lost approximately $1,900 in less than 4 hours. He was physically and emotionally exhausted, still trying to process the reality of what had happened. Miguel counted the cash and checked the receipts on his cell phone. Perfect, he said. Mission accomplished. What now? John asked, dreading the answer. You're free to go now, Daniel replied, handing John back his phone. But first, a few final rules. First, you won't go to the police. If you do, we'll know. Second, you won't cancel any cards or attempt to refund these purchases for the next 3 days. We have people monitoring these transactions. Miguel added, Third, if anyone asks what happened, you'll say you lost money in casinos or spent it on prostitution. Any story but the real one. Because if you involve our operation, we'll find you. And lastly, Daniel said, next time you use dating apps, be a little smarter. No one is perfect like the Isabella you met. If someone seems too good to be true, they probably are. They hailed a taxi and gave the driver the address of John's hotel. During the entire ride back, John sat in silence, staring out the window at the city lights that had seemed magical to him just hours before and now seemed menacing. When he arrived at the hotel, John went straight up to his room and locked the door. He sat on the bed and remained there, motionless, for over an hour, trying to process what had happened. He grabbed his phone and opened Tinder. Isabella's profile was still there, with all those beautiful photos and the seductive bio. He blocked her profile and uninstalled the app. John spent the rest of the night unable to sleep, replaying every detail of his conversation with the fake Isabella, looking for signs he should have missed. How had he been so naive? How had he not suspected such a perfect woman would take an interest in him so quickly? The next morning, he tried calling his bank in the United States to report the fraud, but discovered something even more devastating. The purchases had been made with his physical card, with his PIN in his presence. Technically, they weren't fraud. They were purchases authorized by the cardholder. The bank employee was polite but clear. "Sir, what you're reporting appears to be a case of coercion or extortion, not card fraud. In these situations, you need to file a police report at the location where it occurred." John hung up the phone, feeling even more defeated. Going to the police would mean spending more days in Brazil, dealing with bureaucracy in a language he didn't speak, and risking Miguel and Daniel's threats becoming reality. He spent the next 2 days holed up in his hotel, canceling his plans for the rest of his trip. He changed his return flight to 3 days earlier. He couldn't enjoy the city at all. Every glance at him seemed suspicious. Every invitation or approach from a stranger sent him into a panic. By the way, if you're finding this story helpful, I've created a special resource for those planning to travel to Brazil. It's an ebook called Brazil Unlocked, which covers all types of scams targeting tourists in Brazil and detailed strategies to avoid falling for them. The link is in the description of this video and also in the first pinned comment. It's worth checking out because the information could save you from situations like John's. On Thursday, 2 days before his new flight, John was in the hotel lobby when he received a WhatsApp message from an unknown Brazilian number. It was a photo of him entering the hotel on the night of the coup, clearly taken by someone watching. The message read, "Hello, John. How are your last days in Rio going? We hope you're enjoying it. Remember that our agreement remains valid until you leave the country. Have a safe trip back." John realized they were indeed monitoring his movements. This made him realize they weren't just two opportunistic criminals, but a larger, more sophisticated organization. He deleted the message immediately and decided he wouldn't leave the hotel until the day of his flight. During these final days of seclusion, John had time to analyze the entire scam methodically. He realized how carefully he had been manipulated from the very beginning. Isabella's personality had been specifically crafted to attract him. An independent, successful woman interested in art and culture, with international experience, and empathetic to his post-divorce situation. The scammers had used sophisticated psychological techniques. They gradually built intimacy, made John feel special and unique, created a sense of urgency, "You're only here for a short time," and isolated him from his safe environment. Every step was calculated to lower his defenses and increase his trust in the criminals. John also realized he had unwittingly given away crucial information. Besides mentioning his financial reserves, he had also discussed his routine, his schedule, where he was staying, and how long he would be in the city. All of this information was used against him to plan the scam. The most disturbing part was realizing how convincing Daniel had been when posing as Isabella. The conversations were natural, emotional, and intelligent. Daniel had clearly studied how women communicate on dating apps, how they build intimacy, how they demonstrate interest. He was a consummate actor. At the airport on Friday, while waiting for his flight, John made a final assessment of the damage. In addition to the $20,000 direct loss, he would have to deal with hotel cancellation fees, airline ticket changes, and various other incidental costs. But the worst damage wasn't financial. It was emotional. John had arrived in Brazil hoping to rebuild his trust in relationships after his divorce. Instead, he experienced something that left him even more traumatized and distrustful. He began to question his ability to judge people's character, his intuition, and his emotional intelligence. The flight back to the United States was one of the longest trips of John's life. He stayed up all night, replaying every detail, every decision he had made. How had an intelligent, successful man so easily fallen into a trap so obvious in retrospect? I'll continue now by telling you how this experience completely changed John's life and the important lessons we can learn from this terrible story. He was so ashamed that he preferred to bear the burden alone rather than admit he had fallen for such an elaborate scam. But hiding the truth was taking a heavy emotional toll. John began experiencing symptoms of severe anxiety. He had recurring nightmares about Miguel and Daniel, woke up in a panic thinking he was being followed, and developed paranoia about any interaction with strangers. Dating apps became an immediate anxiety trigger. 3 weeks after returning, John finally decided to seek professional help. It was when he spoke with a trauma psychologist that he began to understand the true extent of what he had suffered. The psychologist explained that John had been the victim not only of a robbery, but of a sophisticated form of psychological manipulation. "You were selected and studied as a target," the psychologist explained. "They identified your emotional vulnerabilities and created a perfect situation to exploit them. It wasn't your naivete, it was their criminal expertise." This perspective began to help John process the experience in a less self-destructive way. He realized he had been victimized by professionals who likely pulled this same scam dozens of times a year, perfecting their techniques with each new victim. The psychologist also helped him understand the specific tactics that had been used against him. The creation of artificial intimacy, the building of trust through shared vulnerability, the physical and emotional isolation, and the constant psychological pressure during the extortion. These were techniques that experienced criminals used precisely because they were extremely effective. 6 months after the incident, John made a courageous decision. He reached out to organizations working to prevent crimes against tourists and decided to share his story publicly. His experience was documented and turned into educational material for other travelers. John discovered that his case was far from unique. In Rio de Janeiro alone, dozens of American and European tourists fall for variations of this same scam every year. Most, like him initially, prefer not to report it out of shame or fear of reprisal. Through his research, John learned chilling details about how these criminal groups operate. They maintain databases of stolen photos of Brazilian models and influencers. They have teams specialized in different languages and cultures. They study the behavior patterns of tourists of different nationalities to customize their attacks. Scammers typically work in groups of 4 to 6 people, someone responsible for online conversations, 2 or 3 who conduct the physical approach, and at least 1 person who coordinates the financial side through partner stores and establishments. It's a highly organized criminal enterprise. John also discovered that choosing Rio de Janeiro was no coincidence. The city has a perfect infrastructure for this type of crime. Many lone tourists, central areas with little police surveillance, commercial establishments that collaborate with criminals, and an urban geography that facilitates the isolation of victims. The most shocking thing was learning that these groups even have lawyers who specialize in guiding them on how to carry out scams without technically constituting kidnapping or violent robbery, keeping legal penalties to a minimum if they are caught. During his recovery process, John developed a list of warning signs he wished he'd known before traveling. If you're planning to visit Brazil or any other country and intend to use dating apps, pay close attention to these tips that could literally save your life and your money. First sign, overly perfect profiles. If someone seems to have exactly what you're looking for, says exactly what you want to hear, and quickly shows intense interest, be suspicious. Real people have imperfections, insecurities, and it takes time to build genuine intimacy. Second sign, a rush to meet in person. Scammers always create a sense of urgency. They'll say you're in town for a short time, that their schedule is packed, that it's a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Genuine people are willing to wait and build trust gradually. Third sign, unusual meeting places. Be wary of any invitations to meet in non-touristy areas, especially if the person insists they know authentic places off the beaten path. First dates should always be in public, busy places. Fourth sign, excessive interest in your financial situation. If someone asks a lot of questions about your work, travel plans, where you're staying, and how long you'll be staying, they may be gathering information for a scam. Fifth sign: personal stories that perfectly mirror your own experiences. Scammers study your profile and create stories that generate emotional identification. If someone has experienced situations suspiciously similar to yours, it could be manipulation. Now, let me give you some practical safety tips that John wishes he'd known. First, never meet someone from an app in unfamiliar locations. Always choose restaurants or cafes in busy tourist areas. Second, always inform someone you trust about your plans, including where you're going and who you're with. Third, always have an escape plan. Know how to get back to your hotel, have money for a taxi, and keep emergency contacts saved on your phone. Fourth, limit the amount of cash and cards you carry on dates. Leave most of it in the hotel safe. Fifth, trust your instincts. If something seems off, if people are too insistent, if you feel uncomfortable, leave the situation immediately. Your safety is more important than politeness or the possibility of offending someone. Now, returning to that ebook I mentioned, Brazil Unlocked truly contains valuable information about all types of scams tourists face in Brazil. It's not just Tinder scams. There are also scams on beaches, at tourist attractions, in restaurants, and in taxis. The material prepares you to recognize and avoid dangerous situations. The link is in the video description and in the first pinned comment. John is much better today, 2 years later. He overcame the trauma through therapy and decided to turn his negative experience into something positive, helping other travelers protect themselves. He still travels, but now with much more care and planning. One interesting thing John discovered is that this type of scam isn't unique to Brazil. Similar variations exist in Thailand, the Philippines, Colombia, and several other popular tourist destinations. Criminals adapt their techniques to the local culture, but the basic structure is always the same. Identify vulnerable tourists, create false emotional connections, isolate the victim, and systematically extort money. John's story teaches us that traveling alone to foreign countries requires a level of caution many of us aren't used to. In our hometowns, we develop instincts and local knowledge that automatically protect us. But when we're in unfamiliar territory, these natural defense mechanisms don't work. The story also shows how our human need for connection can be exploited by malicious individuals. John wasn't just looking for sexual adventure or superficial fun. He was genuinely trying to rebuild his ability to trust and connect with others after a devastating betrayal. The criminals understood this perfectly and created exactly the kind of connection he needed most at that moment. They turned his emotional vulnerability into a weapon against himself. It's a particularly cruel form of crime because it attacks not only the victim's assets, but also their ability to trust and connect with other human beings. For those of you watching this video, I want you to understand one fundamental thing. Falling for a scam like this doesn't mean you're stupid, naive, or incapable. It means you've been attacked by professionals who dedicate their lives to studying and exploiting natural human vulnerabilities. The best defense against this type of crime is knowledge and preparation. Knowing these scams exist, understanding how they work, recognizing the warning signs, and having clear safety protocols in place before traveling. If you like this video and want to see more stories like this, subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell. This way, you'll be notified whenever I post new videos with real stories of international scams. Like this video if you found it helpful, and leave your thoughts on John's story in the comments. Your experiences and opinions can help other travelers protect themselves. And remember, traveling should be a transformative and positive experience. With the right precautions and knowledge, you can explore the world safely and enjoy all the good things each country has to offer without falling victim to criminals who prey on tourists' good faith. John's story ended well, in the sense that he was able to overcome the trauma and move on with his life. But it could have ended much worse, which is why I share this information with you. Knowledge is protection, and protection is the freedom to travel and have incredible experiences around the world.